Hello and welcome to the 17th episode of the European Conservatives podcast, Brussels and Beyond, a podcast designed to keep you in the loop about the political wheelings and dealings that are happening here in Brussels and in the capitals of Europe. My name is Zoltán Kottas. Hungary unveiled the priorities of its 6-month-long EU presidency this week, and the slogan will be "Make Europe Great Again," a play on words of former US President Donald Trump's slogan "Make America Great Again." The Conservative government of Hungary will be attempting to, and I quote, "provide real solutions to the real problems of Europe." EU Affairs Minister János Bóka said Hungary takes over the presidency at a time when Europe faces countless challenges such as the war in Ukraine, mass migration from Africa and Asia, the demographic decline of the continent, climate change, and lagging behind other global powers in terms of competitiveness. The EU has to guarantee the security and peace of Europe, and every one of our priorities will be interpreted within this framework, the minister said. There is indeed a desire for change in Europe, as the results of the recent European elections made clear. Eurosceptic and anti-establishment parties made big gains, and the European Parliament has significantly shifted to the right, reflecting growing frustration in Europe about issues such as uncontrolled mass migration and the European Green Deal, which protesting farmers have blamed for endangering their livelihoods. With regards to migration, the Hungarian presidency's programme envisions closer cooperation between the member states, as well as with key countries of origin and transit, to curb illegal migration and human smuggling. On climate change and environmentalism, Hungary is promising to have a farmer-oriented agricultural policy because it is essential to view agriculture not as a cause of climate change, but as a part of the solution by engaging farmers in adopting more sustainable production practices. Hungary is also eager on speeding up the enlargement of the EU, especially with regards to the Western Balkan countries. The accession of Ukraine, however, is not a priority, as Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has questioned the wisdom of admitting a country actively fighting a war. The European Conservatives and Reformists have become the third largest group in the European Parliament, announcing this week that they have admitted over a dozen new MEPs, reaching a total of 83 seats. The ECR's main parties are Giorgia Meloni's Fratelli d'Italia, the Polish Law and Justice, and the Spanish Vox. New admissions include MEPs from France, Denmark, Bulgaria and Lithuania, all of whom were elected following the European elections on June 9th, which resulted in a rightward shift of the parliament. The ECR's largest new delegation, however, will be the highly controversial nationalist party, the Alliance for the Union of Romanians. The alliance, with 5 MEPs, was founded in 2019 by George Simion, a former football ultra who has been since banned from entering both Ukraine and Moldova because of his pro-Kremlin statements and alleged ties to Russian intelligence services. As my colleague Tamás Orbán writes, admitting the party in ECR is strange, given the group's frequently expressed commitment to helping Ukraine and combating Russian influence in the EU. The main reason several ECR members have been reluctant to welcome the Hungarian ruling party Fidesz is because it is deemed not pro-Ukraine enough. Moreover, the Romanian Alliance has amassed countless scandals back in Romania since it became a parliamentary force in 2020, including obstructing sessions and harassing other MPs, relativizing the Holocaust, and constantly stoking ethnic tensions with Romania's ethnic Hungarian community. For ECR, the admission of the party serves one purpose: to become the third largest bloc in the parliament, and to fulfill Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's ambition to have more leverage in Brussels to gain powerful positions. On Thursday, ECR co-president Nicola Procaccini said that the Romanian Alliance had pledged to subscribe to ECR's values. He admitted that boosting the numbers was the main motivation behind the decision to accept the party. Laurent Vince, however, is not so understanding of the Alliance for the Union of Romanians. In an interview for the European Conservative, The MEP for the Democratic Alliance of Hungarians in Romania, the main political force representing the country's 1 million strong ethnic Hungarian community, says, and I quote, "Every effort should be made to show that the Alliance for the Union of Romanians is an anti-democratic, anti-European and xenophobic party that has no interest in promoting the common good." Lord Antvinter spoke to the European Conservative before the official announcement of the Romanian Alliance's admission into the European Conservatives and Reformists group. The politician warned that the alliance could acquire a more presentable image back home if it were to join a more moderate group in Brussels, such as the ECR. They have talked about driving Hungarians from their homeland and about Romanian soldiers trampling on the steps of the Hungarian parliament, and they have said these things openly in the Romanian parliament. I think we can expect similar things in the European Parliament, says Lord Antvinter. Meanwhile, the Centrist European People's Party, EPP, the largest group in the European Parliament, has also admitted 14 new MEPs from 6 parties across Europe and now has 188 seats altogether. The largest new delegation is the Hungarian Respect and Freedom Party, TISA, which was launched only a few months ago. TISA finished in second place in the Hungarian EU elections with nearly 30%, claiming 7 seats in Brussels. This admission too is a controversial one, firstly because of Ukraine. The EPP is famous for being strict about its pro-Europe, pro-NATO and pro-Ukraine stance, yet Péter Magyar, leader of TISA, has said, "We share the position of the Hungarian government, we will not send troops or weapons to Ukraine." The EPP, however, doesn't seem to care the slightest about its values, as long as it can simultaneously boost its numbers and deliver a blow to Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, whose party Fidesz left the European People's Party in 2021, criticizing the EPP for moving too far to the left. The other controversial fact is that Péter Magyar physically and mentally abused his ex-wife, former Justice Minister Judit Varga, secretly recording their private conversations in order to later blackmail her. This too is being ignored by the EPP. Enikő Győri, an MEP for Fidesz, sarcastically congratulated the EPP for admitting Péter Magyar. "This is the way forward for validating European values in private and public life," she tweeted. The German government is deliberating whether to deport dangerous Afghan criminals back to their country, following a spate of knife attacks and the brutal murder of a policeman by an Afghan failed asylum seeker. Federal Interior Minister Nancy Faeser says they are looking at ways to restart deportations to Afghanistan. Deportations to the country were suspended 3 years ago when the Islamist Taliban movement regained power there, and human rights organizations say that the lives of those deported to the country would be in danger. Interior ministers of the various German states are divided on the issue and are concerned that extraditing people could be unlawful. Left-wing anti-immigration party Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht says anyone who poses a security risk must be deported regardless of their country of origin. Right-wing AfD says anyone who commits a crime has forfeited his right of residence. Despite Chancellor Olaf Scholz claiming in October that the government would begin large-scale deportations, Germany currently hosts more than 250,000 foreigners who have been ordered to leave the country. Carrying out deportations is made harder by the fact that more than half of all migrants who claim asylum in Germany have no form of identification. This is according to a new report by the Welt am Sonntag newspaper. While it may be plausible for refugees from war-torn countries to flee their homes without any official documents, or to not even have any in the first place, it is surprising that 57.5% of Turkish citizens, who surprisingly make up the third largest group of asylum seekers, had no form of identification to show German authorities. The fact that there are a large number of Turkish citizens without identity papers is absurd, according to the official who spoke to the newspaper. He said that under Turkish law, every citizen is obliged to have an identity card. While only 1 in 10 Turkish asylum claims are approved, rejected applicants are seldom deported. As long as we can't present a passport to the Turkish side, Nothing will work, an official told the newspaper. Tensions are simmering within the Austrian governing coalition after Environment Minister Leonore Gewessler, a member of the Green Party, voted for the approval of the so-called nature restoration law at an EU ministers' meeting this week. However, the larger governing party, the Centre-Right People's Party, ÖVP, did not give its consent, and Chancellor Karl Nehammer raised the possibility of a legal challenge with the European Court of Justice, claiming Austria's vote was invalid. My colleague Thomas O'Reilly is here to explain. Thomas, what exactly is the nature restoration law and why is it contentious?
The nature restoration law is a piece of legislation that has been in the works the past 2-3 years. It mandates that EU member states must hand over 20% of their land and sea mass to sort of protected nature reserves. In tandem with this, it rolls out a series of new regulations and monitoring policies around sort of land use. As we've seen in the last few months, it's been a major bone of contention in the recent wave of sort of farmers' agitation. The last few weeks and months of this European Parliament has seen a massive rush to get the nature restoration law over the line ahead of what we saw increases for populist governments and parties. This is similar to the Migration Pact, which slipped through the European Parliament 2 months ago. Now, this week's controversy stems from the final approval given by EU member states to the nature restoration law this Monday. What was supposed to be a routine meeting was derailed by, in essence, Austria's Green Minister from the Green Party, Ms. Gewessler, defecting and effectively voting for the nature restoration law without her government's permission, in particular the permission of her People's Party coalition partners. Now, this volte-face is particularly important considering the razor-thin margins on which the nature restoration law was passed. We've seen a lot of the opposition dissipate in recent months from mainly Eastern European member states due to the insertions of so-called emergency breaks, which would give various nations some breathing room to sort of phase out some of the planned restoration should their economic interests be impinged on. This was a particular point of contention within Finland's European elections, considering the country's extensive forestry industry. But what occurred on Monday was Ms. Gewessler pre-announced that she was voting with her conscience. She said she would have to answer to her children and grandchildren over the matter, and she essentially broke ranks. Now, the vote on the nature restoration law was conducted in Luxembourg under qualified majority voting rules. These entail that 65%, or member states with 65% of the EU population must back a piece of particular legislation. Now, courtesy of Ms. Gewessler's disputed vote, that brought the numbers up to 66%, thus allowing the vote on the nature restoration law to be ratified. This pre-announced decision has opened a Pandora's box, both in terms of EU voting protocol. This has only happened once before in 2019, but you've seen massive implications within Austria's ruling Green and centre-right or centre coalition in the wake of very poor European election results and a planned legislative election before the end of this year.
Do we know why the Green Environment Minister decided to go ahead without the consent of her government?
Yes, in her words and in the words of her coalition partners, the OVP, she placed ideology over a direct agreement on behalf of Austria's coalition government. Now, this morning, charges have been formally filed with Vienna's public prosecutor. The head of the Belgian presidency of the European Council has stated that regardless of the legal fallout in Austria, this is a domestic political issue and vote still stands. But it's something of a grey area. We've heard murmurings of a challenge at the European Court of Justice. But what is particularly interesting is this will not cause a snap election in Austria. Austria has been governed by this coalition since 2019. If you remember correctly, that coalition formed in the wake of the Ibizagate scandal and alleged influence peddling between the nationalist FPO party and the Kremlin. While a lot of these claims were dismissed in the court, you have the FPO took at the time a political hammering. Now fortune seems to have been reversed, and you see the FPO in a sort of insurgent position. First in the political in polling at 27 to 30%. They claimed 6 out of 20 Austria's MEP seats, coming first in last week's European elections. And by all accounts, they should win legislative elections for the lower house come September and potentially form a coalition with the OVP. What is interesting in this week's spat between Austria's coalition is the unwillingness of the centre-right to break from the Greens, as well as the fact that it cements the fact that Austria, that even this coalition of convenience is running out of road and is exhausted. But yeah, certainly an interesting precedent and bodes well for Austria's right-wing opposition. But in essence, with the nature restoration law, this is the final hurdle at an EU level, and it is down for member states to now formulate plans on implementing nature restoration laws over the next 6 months to a year.
As you mentioned, there won't be snap elections, but there will be elections anyway. They're scheduled to be held in September. And you also mentioned that the FPÖ, the right-wing Freedom Party, is doing very well in the polls. What is driving their popularity?
Well, Austria is rather unusual within the European Union for its steadfast neutrality. Rather famously, it is not a main member of NATO. It takes something of a backseat when it comes to EU military integration. And there's been sort of a broad-based consensus from the left and the right over sort of hesitation of supporting the Ukrainian cause. The driving factors for the FPÖ, similar for many Western European populist parties, are migration, the impact of sanctions on the Austrian domestic economy, as well as the impact of green legislation. Similar to my own nation, Ireland, the presence of a Green Party in government has resulted in green legislation being spearheaded at a national level. You see disquiet over the implementation of the Green Deal, but a combination of migration, disquiet over the Ukrainian war, and simply political inertia coming from Vienna's fairly loveless coalition are all driving the popularity of the FPÖ, which, as I mentioned, is a result of fortune from a relative hammering that the party got in 2019 in the wake of the Ibizagate scandals and accusations of Kremlin ties and influence peddling. But by all accounts, this cements FPÖ's whip hand over the coalition and potentially sets the stage for a centre-right, populist-right coalition with the FPÖ in the driving seat come the autumn.
Thomas, thank you very much. Hospitals and health centres in Poland that refuse to perform abortions could lose up to 2% of their state funding under new measures from the country's leftist Liberal coalition government. The first fine saw authorities pursue lawfare against multiple health centres that refused a woman undergoing psychiatric care an abortion. Currently, under Polish law, abortion is restricted except in instances of rape, incest, and threats to the mother's health, including mental health. The issue is seen as a political tool with which the new progressive Donald Tusk-led government can undo the legacy of its conservative predecessor. A total of 161 legal abortions occurred in Poland in 2022. Responding to attempts to ease access to abortion, tens of thousands of Polish Catholics rallied nationwide last Sunday, warning against abortion on demand, attacks on the identity of marriage and the family, and the moral corruption of children. The introduction of abortion on demand is a key symbolic component of Poland's march to modernity, according to Donald Tusk. Outgoing Liberal Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte on Thursday clinched the race to become the next head of NATO after his only challenger, Romanian President Klaus Iohannis, pulled out. Rutte is expected to be formally named by NATO's 32 nations in the coming days and should take over when current chief Jens Stoltenberg's term ends on October the 1st. Rutte continues the well-established European tradition that whenever a politician fails at home, they have a good chance of being rewarded with a better post in Brussels. The staunch Ukraine hardliner quickly won the support of heavyweights, the United States, Britain, France and Germany, but Eastern and Central European countries had pushed for one of their own to get the NATO job. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán agreed to endorse Rutte after the two agreed that NATO will grant Hungary an opt-out on the alliance's joint actions on Ukraine, including sending military and financial aid, as well as an exception from taking part in possible future NATO missions inside Ukraine. Meanwhile, Slovakia is supporting Rutte in exchange for a new anti-aircraft air defense system to replace the country's single S-300 system it had previously donated to Ukraine. Sweden adopted a defense cooperation agreement with the United States this week, under which US military personnel can be stationed in Sweden for extended periods of time. While there, they can conduct training exercises and store weapons, ammunition, vehicles, and other military equipment in the country. The USA already has similar agreements with several countries in Scandinavia and the Baltic nations, including Norway, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The Swedish government believes that the agreement will deter Russia and, in the event of a conflict, shorten the distance between American soldiers, equipment, and supplies, and whatever war zone they need to be deployed in. The opposition Green and Left parties, while agreeing with most of the treaty, have decried the absence of an explicit ban on nuclear weapons on Swedish soil. Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson last month declared that in wartime the country could host nuclear weapons. If there is a war with us on our land, which Sweden is drawn into after an attack by others, then it is a completely different situation. Then the whole of NATO benefits from the nuclear umbrella that must exist in democracies as long as countries like Russia have nuclear weapons, he said. Recently, Poland has also floated the idea of hosting American nuclear weapons on its soil. British party Reform UK may get as many as 7 seats, according to opinion polling 2 weeks before the general elections, which are set to be held on July the 4th. One of the elected MPs could be Nigel Farage, who became the leader of Reform UK only a few weeks ago. While the opposition Labour Party is expected to win the elections by a large margin, the governing Conservatives and Reform UK are neck and neck in second place, both polling at around 18 to 20%. Because of the first past the post system, Reform UK would do well with only 7 seats in the 650-seat parliament. Earlier this week, Nigel Farage unveiled his party's so-called contract with the nation, emphasising that this is not a manifesto because nobody now believes a word that the documents say, he said, alluding to the broken promises of the two mainstream parties. Amongst the party's pledges is the freezing of all non-essential legal migration, stopping illegal channel crossings in its first 100 days in power, incentivizing people to use private healthcare to reduce NHS waiting lists, and scrapping self-destructive net zero policies to help cut energy bills. Nigel Farage says that this election is already over, that Labour will definitely win it. But he adds that this election is the first important step on the road to the 2029 general election. Our aim and our ambition is to establish a bridgehead in Parliament and to become a real opposition to a Labour government, he said. And that concludes this episode of Brussels and Beyond. Don't forget to read our magazine, check out our website, subscribe to our Twitter, Facebook and YouTube channels, and watch our monthly TV show Inside Brussels. Hope you tune in again next week. Have a very good week. Bye bye.